I was pouring myself coffee when I caught the movement. Not outside in the woods, right at my window. My hand froze midair. Just a few feet away, staring at me through the glass with those pale, wild eyes, was a lynx. I didn't move. She didn't either. We just stood there, eye to eye, two creatures who probably shouldn't be this close. Her fur looked patchy, like she'd been shedding or scratching. Her ribs showed through her sides. She wasn't just wild, she was starving. I'd seen lynx before, once or twice, always from a distance. They never got this close. Never. The coffee in my hand had gone cold, but I didn't care. I backed away slowly, not wanting to spook her. I didn't know what made her approach. Desperation, maybe? Hunger that outweighed fear? I opened the fridge and pulled out some leftover roasted chicken. Not much. Maybe a few bones and scraps. I hesitated for a second. Feeding a wild animal is a line you don't really come back from. But then I saw her ribs again. The way she stood still, like even movement was a burden. I stepped out onto the porch. She didn't flinch. I tossed the chicken pieces gently onto the ground, a few feet in front of her. Then I stepped back. She waited, maybe to see if it was safe, maybe to see if I'd come closer. I didn't. She walked up, slowly, carefully, and started eating. Her mouth moved fast, but her body stayed tight, ready to bolt. Only she didn't. She finished it all in seconds, then lifted her head and looked right at me again. That look, it did something to me. There was no aggression in her, just exhaustion, and maybe a hint of trust. Or maybe I imagined that part. I stayed out there for a while after she walked back into the trees. I scanned the woods, trying to see if she lingered, but she disappeared like mist. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every branch that cracked outside made me sit up. I kept thinking about those eyes, about her bones pressing against her skin. What if she didn't make it through the night? By morning, I was a mess. Barely slept. I walked outside, still holding the same coffee mug. It had become a routine for me after moving out here. Start the day on the porch, even if it's freezing or raining. Just breathe. But I froze again. She was there, standing in the grass. Not alone. 3 small shapes tumbled out from behind her. They weren't much more than balls of fur, thin and awkward on their feet. But they were definitely lynx cubs. My throat tightened. She brought them here. To me. What the hell was I supposed to do with that? The mother didn't move. Just stood there, watching me, while her cubs pawed at each other, sniffed the dirt, looked around with wide eyes. I backed up again and grabbed more food, this time whatever I had. Some ground beef, half a piece of fish, even a chunk of stale bread. I laid it all out on a large flat stone near the edge of the woods. The cubs watched, curious. The mother stayed back until I walked away. Then she moved, slow and deliberate. She led the cubs to the food. Let them eat first. I sat back on the porch steps, heart pounding. This wasn't normal. This wasn't something that happened in real life. Wild animals didn't trust people like this. And they sure as hell didn't introduce their young to them. She looked at me again, her head low, her eyes softer now. Not tame. Never tame. But not afraid. When they finished, they disappeared back into the trees. I stayed out there for hours. I didn't care about work, about emails, about anything else. I just kept replaying that moment. The cubs, the mother, her trust. All day I couldn't shake the feeling. Something wasn't right. Lynx don't do this unless they have no choice. Why bring them to me? Was she injured? Sick? Or just desperate? That night, I left more food out. I didn't see them again before bed. But around 3 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of soft paws on the porch. I didn't move. I just listened. They were here. And I realized I wasn't afraid. I was waiting. For what? I didn't know yet. The next few mornings felt like waking into a dream that hadn't ended yet. Every day, just after sunrise, I'd hear soft rustling near the tree line. I'd walk out with coffee in one hand and my heart in my throat, and there they'd be. The mother lynx would emerge first. She'd pause, scan the yard like she was still unsure. Then, with a low huff, she'd let the cubs out from wherever they'd been hiding. The little ones would tumble out like wind-up toys, clumsy, curious, underfed. They never came close. But they didn't run, either. I learned quickly not to make sudden moves. I kept my distance, laid food out every morning, and backed away. Eggs, raw chicken, scraps of whatever meat I had left. I even started buying more when I made trips into town. The cashier joked about me feeding a football team. I smiled and said nothing. By the 3rd day, the cubs recognized the routine. When I came out with the food, they'd perk up. One even chirped. This tiny, high-pitched sound that cut right through me. They were still cautious, always watching their mother, waiting for her signal. But they weren't afraid. That's what scared me most. The mother, though, she never relaxed. She'd eat only after the cubs were done. She never turned her back to me, never blinked too long. There was a quiet fierceness in her, like a spring coiled so tight it might snap. Still, she came. Every day, and I started noticing things. Like how her gait was stiff on one side. How she never used her left forepaw to push anything or shift weight. Like she was favoring it. I kept watching, kept wondering. Why me? There were hundreds of acres of woods behind my house. Miles of untamed forest. Plenty of quiet corners where a lynx could keep her young hidden. Why walk out into the open? Why trust a man? Maybe she was out of options. Maybe she'd lost her hunting grounds. Maybe someone cleared land where she used to roam. I didn't know, and I couldn't ask. But I started to worry. Not just about them. About myself. This wasn't sustainable. I was feeding wild predators in my yard. Every day, they were getting used to it. Getting used to me. And while part of me was honored, another part couldn't stop thinking about how badly this could go wrong. One morning, I walked out to find the food from the night before untouched. No cubs. No movement. Just silence. Then I saw her. She was sitting alone in the tall grass. Slumped. Her head low. That left paw stretched out awkwardly, like it was dead weight. Her side was streaked with something dark. Dirt. Blood. I wasn't sure. She looked up at me. Something in her face was different. No challenge. No tension. Just pain. I didn't move toward her. Just crouched at the edge of the porch, my gut tightening. Where were the cubs? I scanned the trees. Nothing. No movement. No sound. I whispered, not even knowing why. Maybe out of instinct. Maybe to comfort myself. Hey girl, where are your babies? She didn't flinch. I didn't see them that day. Or the next. Each morning I left food out anyway. I sat on the porch for hours, watching, listening, waiting. By the third day, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my boots, a flashlight, and headed into the woods. I followed the path I'd seen them come from, looking for broken branches, claw marks, anything. After about an hour, I found it, a small den dug into a fallen log, half covered in leaves and brush. I recognized the smell before I saw anything else. Musky wild, and something else. Sharp, metallic, blood. One of the cubs was there, alone, alive, but barely. It was curled up, eyes barely open, breath fast and shallow. No sign of the others. I backed away slowly, not wanting to leave scent or scare the mother if she was nearby. I ran home, grabbed towels, gloves, and a pet carrier I'd used for a stray dog months ago. I came back, heart pounding. He was still there, still breathing. I wrapped him up and carried him home. I didn't sleep that night either. He stayed in the garage, in a makeshift bed of blankets. I kept the lights dim, checked on him every hour, fed him tiny drops of warm broth with a syringe. He made it through the night, but I didn't see her again. Not yet. The cub spent 2 nights in my garage. I kept the door cracked so the air stayed fresh, and I wrapped him in layers of towels inside an old laundry basket. He was so light I barely felt his weight when I picked him up. I tried not to touch him more than necessary, afraid my scent would cling. He was eating, little by little. Broth, soaked kibble, tiny pieces of chicken. Every few hours I sat next to him, just to make sure he was breathing. That tiny chest, moving up and down. Still no sign of the mother. On the 3rd night, something woke me. It was faint at first. A high-pitched cry. Not human. Not quite cat either. I jumped out of bed and listened. There it was again. Squealing. Whimpering. I grabbed a flashlight and jacket and stepped outside. The sound came from deeper in the woods. I hesitated. Then I moved. Quickly. The air was cold and wet. The kind that soaks through your shoes and clings to your skin. I pushed through the brush, flashlight bouncing between branches and roots. About 20 minutes in, I saw a shadow move. I turned off the light. Waited. A low grunt. Then silence. Then another whimper from farther ahead. I moved slower now, closer to the sound. The ground dipped suddenly. I slid down into a shallow ravine, and that's when I saw them. 2 cubs, tangled between fallen limbs and brush. One was trying to climb out, weakly pawing at the ground. The other just lay there. I froze. My body screamed not to move. If the mother was near, this could go very bad. But I saw no sign of her. No glowing eyes. No growl. Just those 2 tiny, broken sounds. I made my way down, crouching low. The first cub hissed, then chirped again. Desperate, not aggressive. The second one still didn't move. I pulled off my jacket, wrapped it around the limp cub, then reached for the second. He was heavier, stronger, clung to me as I lifted him. My hands shook. I kept looking around, expecting her to leap out from the dark. But nothing came. I didn't run, just walked. Steady, focused. By the time I reached the edge of my property, my arms were shaking from the effort and the fear. I set them up in the garage, same basket, more towels. 2 breathing bodies now, instead of 1. The limp one stirred. Barely, but enough. I didn't sleep. When the sun came up, I stumbled out to the porch, thinking maybe, just maybe, I'd see her again. I did, but not how I expected. She was lying at the edge of the woods. Not standing, lying. I ran to her without thinking. Blood matted her fur near the shoulder. Her breathing was ragged. That left leg was worse, swollen, bruised, clearly torn. She lifted her head slightly when she saw me. Didn't growl, didn't move, just watched. I knelt beside her, not daring to touch. What the hell happened to you? I looked around. There were drag marks in the dirt. Maybe she tried to follow the cubs' cries. Maybe she tried to lead them out herself and collapsed here. I knew I couldn't move her, and I sure as hell couldn't leave her like this. Back at the house, I called every wildlife rehab number I could find. Most didn't pick up. One guy answered and said he was hours away, and even if he came, he needed permission from local authorities. Then I remembered James. He was a retired vet who volunteered with a local shelter. I'd met him once at a town cleanup. Quiet guy, sharp eyes, always carried a pocket knife. I called him, told him everything. He didn't even ask why, just said, "I'll be there in 20. And he was. He showed up in an old blue pickup, toolbox in the back, and calm like he'd done this 100 times. I walked him to the edge of the woods. He crouched, observed her from a distance. That leg's bad. Might be a fracture. Looks like she tore a tendon. Probably tried to fight something off. Can you help her? I'll do what I can. But this isn't a clinic. We work here, we work fast. We sedated her. Very carefully. James cleaned the wound, wrapped it tight, and gave her antibiotics from a kit he brought. She never once lashed out. When it was over, we laid her under the tree line, covered lightly with branches for shade. James said to let her rest. Said maybe she'd make it, maybe not. That night, I sat on the porch with all 3 cubs in the garage. My chest felt hollow. And then, just before dawn, headlights cut through the mist. A truck rolled up. Forest Service. A man stepped out with a clipboard. "You've been feeding wild animals out here." My throat went dry. "Because we've had reports. And we need to talk." The man with the clipboard didn't smile. He wore a Forest Service badge and the kind of look that made your stomach twist before he even said anything. "You keeping animals?" I hesitated. "No." "Then what are those?" He pointed to the garage. "Just helping some injured wildlife. Temporarily." He nodded slowly, like he'd heard that line before. "You aware it's illegal to rehabilitate certain species without a permit?" I didn't answer. He sighed, stepped off the porch. "We've gotten calls. Neighbors said you've been feeding a lynx. Some think you're keeping her. You know how dangerous that is. She came on her own. She's wild. I never kept her." Still, the man made notes on his pad. "Look, I'm not trying to make this a big deal. But if she's still around, it becomes our responsibility. We need to assess the risk." He handed me a warning notice. Said someone from Wildlife Control might be by soon. Then drove off like it was just another Tuesday. I stood there for a long time, paper in my hand, chest buzzing. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. By the next day, the grocery clerk asked if I'd really trained a lynx. At the gas station, a guy in camo laughed and said I was raising forest cats now. Small towns don't need facts. Just one story and a slow news week. I stopped going out, kept the curtains drawn. James came by once to check the mother. Her leg was healing, barely, but she wasn't moving much. He gave me more antibiotics, wished me luck. "You need to be careful. People are talking." What else is new? I was angry. Not at James. At all of it. The rules, the people, the system that said helping something wild was a crime. That night, I made a decision. We'd finish her care quietly. After that, I'd drive the cubs to a certified rehab center 2 counties over. If they could take them. If they didn't report me first. I emailed a wildlife vet I'd once seen speak at a conservation event. Her name was Claire. I explained the whole story. The mother. The injuries. The cubs. To my surprise, she replied an hour later. I can come tonight. I'll bring supplies. But we keep this quiet. She showed up just after 10. A woman in her 40s, sharp voice, tired eyes. She didn't waste time on greetings. Walked straight to the tree line with me, gloves on, bag over her shoulder. The mother lynx didn't move when we approached. Her breath was shallow. Claire checked her leg, muttered under her breath, and gave her another dose of meds. She touched her side gently, checking for fractures. She's strong, Claire said, but she needs rest. And these cubs, they need a proper facility soon. I know. We worked under flashlight beams, silent except for our breathing and the rustle of leaves. Then Claire turned to me. You've done more than most would. But if people find out what's going on here, they won't care why. Just that it happened. I nodded. My throat was tight. She left before midnight. I didn't sleep. Again. Next morning, I went to check the mother lynx. But she wasn't there. Not where we'd left her. I followed her trail. She hadn't gone far, just deeper into the woods, dragging her leg, trying to disappear. I stood there, hands in fists, wanting to call out. But what would I say? Later that day, James called. You need to know something. They've started traps. What? Out in the western section. They say there's a threat. Probably came from that Forest Service report. They think she's a danger now. My stomach dropped. Traps meant one thing. They weren't going to relocate her. They were going to end it. I paced the house like a caged thing. Every plan I had fell apart. I couldn't move the cubs now. She was still out there. And they were still too weak. I stared at the woods for hours. Night came fast. And with it, rain. A soft knock pulled me from the window. James again. Wet, tired, eyes hard. If we're going to save her, it has to be tonight. We loaded up his truck. Syringes, gloves, crate, towels. I had one chance to find her before someone else did. And I wasn't going to waste it. We searched until dawn. James and I took separate trails, calling out in low voices, scanning the undergrowth with flashlights. We found nothing. No blood. No fur. No sign of her. Just trees, endless and quiet. At some point, James stopped me. If she's hiding, she's doing it for a reason. She may not want to be found. I knew he was right, but that didn't make it easier. The next week passed in silence. I still fed the cubs. They were growing stronger, more playful. One even started pawing at the door when I'd open the garage, but I kept them inside. If anyone saw them now, it'd be over. Every morning, I stood on the porch, coffee in hand, staring at the edge of the woods. Nothing. Then, on the 7th day, I opened the door, and there she was. She was barely recognizable. Mud-caked, soaked from rain, eyes sunken, body trembling. Her leg was worse again. Maybe infected. Maybe broken completely now. She didn't walk up to me. She limped to the porch, lowered herself onto the first step, and just sat. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My throat was tight. We sat like that for a long time. Me standing, her breathing slow and shallow. I knew, somehow, that this wasn't a visit. It was goodbye. She turned her head, looked toward the trees, then stood, legs shaking, and limped back into the woods. Never once looked back. I didn't follow. The next 2 days, I barely left the garage. The cubs knew something had changed. They were restless, crying more, moving constantly, searching. On the 3rd morning, I packed a backpack with water, protein bars, and a small blanket. I told myself I was just hiking, but I brought the carrier anyway. I followed the same trail she had come from. An hour in, I heard a rustle, then a chirp. I moved slowly, carefully. There they were, all 3 cubs. They were tucked into a shallow spot under the roots of a large tree, wrapped in mud and leaves, as if she had hidden them there herself. The smallest was curled against the other 2, weak but alive. I sat beside them for a long time, letting them get used to my presence again. When they didn't flinch, I lifted them, one by one, into the carrier. As I walked home, I scanned the woods for any sign of her. But the forest was still. She was gone. A month later, I transferred the cubs to Claire's facility. They were old enough to be weaned, strong enough to be assessed. She took them without questions. And a year later, I was working there full-time, feeding injured foxes, tracking released coyotes, sitting with owls that couldn't fly anymore, teaching high school volunteers how to change bandages. Sometimes, I'd see the lynx cubs, now almost adults, in a special enclosure far from the public. They never ran from me, but they never came too close either. Just watched, calm and quiet, the way their mother used to. I never saw her again, and I stopped asking why she came to me that first day. Maybe she knew she wouldn't make it. Maybe she needed somewhere safe for them. Or maybe, just maybe, she saw something in me that I hadn't seen in myself. A second chance. No words. No promises. Just trust.